So again, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you're all the way in Baltimore, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. What's it like there?
So I grew up in the county, like Baltimore County. And then now I currently live in the city, which isn't not really the city, but like because it like borders the county as well, but it's like it's definitely not like really city life. Like we got a lot of trees and hills.
So like a
uh,
lot of hiking and stuff, I would assume that you could go do.
Not necessarily in the part where I live, but yeah, if you go out in different parts of the county, there's lots of hiking and not necessarily like mountainous, but like woodsy kind of stuff.
Okay. Are you into any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I don't do it as much as I would like to, mostly because I don't like hiking by myself because I have no sense of direction. And when you're in the woods, everything looks the same. So, for safety reasons, I don't go hiking by myself.
Yeah, that seems kind of smart. I ran an ultra marathon like I guess almost 2 years ago. And if I didn't map out the course, I mapped it out on my phone. If I didn't map it out, I think I would have spent the night in there because there was no way I would have been able to find my way out. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Um, so you grew up in Baltimore. Let's kind of get into your story a little bit. Who are you? Where are you from? Like who, what makes you you?
So I grew up in Baltimore County. I was adopted from China when I was about 5, 6 months old. My mom and my aunt went over and got me. My dad doesn't like flying, so he stayed here. And so that was like back in like 95 or so. Um, and I was adopted from the uh, Anhui province. I have no idea how to actually like pronounce that. But then I just kind of grew up in Baltimore County, and then my parents still live in the same house that I grew up in, so I stayed in one place for the majority of my life, and then I went to college in upstate New York, and then now I'm back here. I got my master's at School of Social Work of School University of Maryland School of Social Work in Baltimore, um, and then here I am.
I feel like that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
You kind of just grazed over the fact that you're from China, and that you
Yeah.
were brought here when you were 5 or 6 months old.
Yeah.
Um, do you know anything? I mean, obviously you're too young at that point to remember anything.
Yeah.
But what was the situation like? Why did you go up for adoption? Like, what was that like?
So I don't know too much about my adoption story. I had written a post a little while back about my story and stuff. So I from what I do know is that I was left at a fire station about 17 days after I was born. And then my parents or my mom went over to China with a group of five, including my family, five other families who were through the same adoption agency, adoptions together. And then they went over and adopted five babies. And I still keep
Wow.
in contact with three of the other ones. So we're all kind of spread out though. One is in Baltimore City, close to me. One moved out to Colorado 2 years ago or so. And then there's one who lives out in California. And
Wow.
her parents still they live on the eastern shore of Maryland, and then I actually live like maybe 10 minutes away from the other one who's in Colorado from her parents.
Wow. So are these your siblings?
No, so it's five babies into five separate families.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Um, so it's kind of cool then. You kind of have like, I guess, peers that kind of went through the same thing as you that you could always reach out to and talk with, right?
hmm yeah. I mean, in terms of like coming out of the fog, as we say, we're all kind of on like different wavelengths of that. I know my friend who lives the closest to me right now, she was much more out of the fog than any of us. I mean, she had lots of questions growing up, and like she was very interested in finding out as much as she could. I came out of the fog maybe a few years ago, which kind of sparked my journey with all of this stuff.
As far as the trauma, so being a trauma social worker or therapist, I mean.
Well,
Yeah.
so no, that came first. So also when I was younger, I had a rare blood disorder that was treated like cancer. And so I had chemo, bone marrow transplant, all that fun stuff.
What is it called?
Aplastic anemia.
Okay.
So I'm completely fine now. That happened when I was 8. But that kind of led me to my career now.
You said you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
Was it scary? Did you know really what was going on?
So like when you're 8, like you have enough awareness of what's going on, but like obviously not like the cognitive abilities to like fully understand what was going on. I do have like a vivid memory of like when I was sitting with my parents when they finally figured out what was wrong with me. I was like in a room with my parents and the team of doctors and whatever, and they were like starting to go through all the things, and I got bored, and one of the child life specialists just took me back to the playroom, and then that was it. But I mean, since I was so young, a lot of things are a blur. But I think for the most part, I had like a relatively good understanding of what was going on, at least for an 8-year-old's capacity.
What kind of symptoms were you having?
So the first sign that something was wrong was that I had noticed all these little red dots all over my body, and which is called petechiae, and that happens when your platelets are very low. And so basically with aplastic anemia, it attacks your bone marrow. And so your bone marrow is responsible for making your red blood cells or white blood cells and platelets. So when it attacked my bone marrow, I didn't have like any of those. Wow. So what really set my mom off for noticing something that was wrong was that I had come home. I think it was like playing during recess or something at school, and I'd fallen, and I had a huge blood blister on my shin, and it was like tie-dye black, purple, all the colors. And so my mom's mom, she had MS and lupus, so like my mom kind of already had some kind of knowledge, like she knew that just did not look right. So they took me to the doctors. Next thing I know, I'm in the hospital.
This episode is brought to you by Red Bike Delivery. This delivery service operates only using battery-powered, eco-friendly transportation. Red Bike Delivery is there for all your delivery needs, whether it's dinner for the family, flowers for your partner, or new houseplants for your new collection. Red Bike Delivery will gladly deliver those and everything in between. So what are you waiting for? Check out Red Bike Delivery on Facebook or Instagram for more information. Red Bike Delivery, because there's only one Earth. Wow, that's scary.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, as an 8-year-old, like you're kind of just like, okay.
Right. Yeah, you think you're gonna be fine no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, kids are so resilient. Like a lot of times they just like don't. They're like, whatever. Here I am, and everything's gonna be fine.
Right. Now, you had mentioned that your mom's mom had an issue, and so she was able to recognize that. Now, being an adoptee, is it difficult knowing like what health issues that you might have from your parents, from your biological parents? Is that something you've had trouble trying to figure out?
I mean, I don't know any of my medical history. When I had gotten sick, my mom tried to go back to China, and that was in 2003 when SARS had broken out. So she wasn't able to go back, and she was going to try to find my biological family, but because of SARS, she wasn't able to do that. But I mean, I'm okay with not knowing. I'm not one of those people who's like, I need to know everything about my genes and all these things. I'm like kind of okay with things happening as they come. Because I mean, when you're an international adoptee, there's so much red tape and so many things that you have to do in order to like even try to find something. And like it's expensive as hell to try to go and like do the whole surgeon reunion thing. And so like you need to have resources and connections and like it's a
Right.
lot of work.
And you're dealing with China also, so they're
Mhm.
they're pretty censored over there. So like as far as doing like a 23andMe, is that even a thing over there?
Yes. So I actually have done 23. I mean, I have like distant relatives that like third, fourth, fifth cousins or whatever that are very distant to pop up all the time. But I haven't found anything like I also didn't do like the medical thing of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Cause I mean, like if I knew I was gonna like get Alzheimer's later in life, like I'm okay with not knowing that. Like I can cross that bridge when I get there. I don't necessarily want to have another lingering thing of like trauma happening.
That is funny. That is funny because I was kind of in the same situation as you. I was adopted and I
Mhm.
didn't know anything like health wise or things that ran in my family. And like every time I went to a doctor's appointment, they'd be like, what's your medical history?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
I I couldn't tell you. Um, but you know, like for me, I just more knowledge is always better for me. So I'm like, I want to know. So I did the 23andMe and
Mhm.
mainly for my health. So I knew like what I, was dealing with. And because of that, I ended up finding my family. I found like my dad who I hadn't seen for like, I don't know, 20 some years.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't even know he was alive. So I didn't even know who he was. And
Mhm.
through like I think second cousin, I was able to find him.
That's crazy.
It's wild. I think it's wild.
Yeah, I've met some other adoptees. One who had told me that she had done 23andMe and she found her biological family, and she was a Chinese adoptee. And then basically found out that her entire adoption story was a lie and that she had all of these siblings like that
Oh,
were older than her. Um, so that was interesting. Like that's so wild.
so growing up and did you know that you were adopted your
Oh,
whole
absolutely. My parents are white and Jewish. There's no way, no way getting around that.
So what was that like? Because obviously there's a cultural difference there, right? Um,
Hmm.
what was that like growing up? Was it difficult to deal with?
I mean, so I identify as a transracial and international adoptee, and so when you have like transracial adoptees, meaning like your race is different than the family that adopted you, and so yes, there's lots of lots of identity things that I didn't really know or didn't really even have words for until up until like the last few years of my life. And then now as a therapist, I'm trying to get more into specializing in adoptees, and being more adoption competent. Because being an adopted person is just not enough to clinically work with other adoptees.
Right.
Um, and so it definitely has been challenging. I mean, I grew up in a predominantly white Christian area. I didn't really fit in with my family. I didn't really fit in with my community. Even the Asian people that I had grown up with, like I didn't fit in with them. So there's a lot of places where I've been othered, and so
Right.
like I mean that's a very common thing for adopted people to go through, especially transracial adoptees.
Absolutely. And I can I can I can I don't want to say like identify with you, but but I understand because my background is Honduran, and when I was adopted, I was adopted into a Caucasian home. So like everybody in
Mhm.
the house is white, and I obviously have darker skin than they do. And so like
Mhm.
when you go out in public, people like okay, they look like they're related. He does not look like he's related.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because sometimes I'll be like out in public with my mom, and like some people will be like, "Oh, is that your daughter?" And we're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "You, she looks just like you." And we're like, "Oh, really?" We just kind of look at each other and just laugh. I mean, there's really not much else you can do.
That is so funny because I've had that happen too, where like my adopted brother, who's my adopted parents' biological son, he's obviously
Mhm.
Caucasian, and like him and I would go out like to the mall or something, and we'd get to talking to somebody, and they'd be like, "Oh, are you guys twins?" And we're like, "What? No, we have different skin color. What?"
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's a strange thing that happens. I mean, there's been plenty of things that people have said to me just about adoption regard like because people just don't really know how to like react to that
Yeah.
either. So they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then get really awkward and then start asking all these invasive questions, which I'm sure you you can relate to. Like you get a little bit used to it, and then you're also like, "Are you really asking me this stupid question right now?"
For me, it's like, okay, I guess it looks like I have to like sit down and tell them another story. This, like it's just a part of who I am now. Like I don't for me, I don't think it's invasive because I mean, obviously this is what I do. I talk about my story like through the
Hmm.
podcast and whatnot. But it's like when somebody starts asking questions, it's like, okay, here we go again.
Hmm.
Gotta
Yeah,
explain it
yeah,
again.
yeah. And I think the comfort level for people is so different. Like it kind of depends on who's asking me. Like if they're asking me because they're genuinely interested in me as a person, like want to get to know me, that's a whole different story than somebody off the street who's like, "Oh, I'm just curious and I want to know everything because I don't know anything about this and I want you to educate me on your experience as an adoptee," or insert any other minority or
Right, right. Yeah, that's something that a lot of people just don't understand.
Mhm.
Like normal like people in in our culture, they don't understand what it's like to be an adoptee or like the things that surround it. And I don't know. I guess they're kind of interested in it.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And I mean, I adoption is definitely something that you cannot just like Google very easily. Um, and I think I really didn't even know how big the adoptee community was until I started my therapist Instagram and kind of started looking more towards adoption and starting following people and started following hashtags and all of those things. And I was like, wow. And that's where I really have been able to like find the language that I didn't have growing up or even as a clinician because you don't get taught those things in school. You don't get taught those things in college. You don't get taught those things in grad school. You just kind of get taught like the very basics where adoption is like an enigma.
Right,
Like
right.
there's so many things. And I mean, I think it's so cool that like we have that one thing in common, but like our stories are so vastly different.
Oh, extremely. I mean, every situation is different just because I mean, so many people go up for adoption for so many different reasons. Like for you,
Hmm.
obviously somebody gave you up, right?
Hmm.
For me, it was we were taken away from our biological families, and
Hmm.
and then those situations vary so drastically too, because like some
Yeah.
people might be somebody might grow up in a bad situation where they just have shitty parents, and then other people might have parents who love them and care about them, but aren't able to take care of them.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't necessarily know my whole background, but yeah, I mean, I've also worked with kids in the foster system and I used to work in a residential treatment center for kids with like very severe emotional behavioral um needs because of trauma and the things that these kids would go through. I'm like, I don't even understand how you can like still play with a truck and like be cool with that. Like I don't
Right.
I can't even like imagine.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so many kids go through so many terrible things. My I've seen so many. I mean, because my adopted parents did foster care for a while after like we were
mhm.
adopted. After we moved out and stuff, they like had other kids come in, and like some of these stories, I'm just like, holy cow! Like, no wonder why that kid has like those issues, or like because like it's so easy for like a kid to go to school or something, and then everybody just think, wow, he's a shitty kid, but they don't understand the things that he went through that is causing him to act that way.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, my first therapist job, I was working in community mental health. And so I was part-time in the outpatient mental health clinic itself. And then I was also put in a elementary middle school in, both were in the city, just one was east and one was west. And like, a lot of times these kids just get labeled by
Yeah.
their bad behaviors, and like, they're not bad kids. I mean, a lot of them would wind up in my office, and we'd just be having a grand old time playing with Play-Doh and like playing with toys and like doing therapy stuff. But like, they're not bad kids. They just have a lot of things. And then, I mean, that kind of gets into a whole thing of like, are we actually diagnosing people with mental health disorders, or is it their environment that sucks?
Right.
You know, I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
I had, just off of that note, when I first started working at GM, I had a boss that him and I didn't get along very well. He was just kind of like, he was an old school guy. He was an old guy, and he was just old school, like follow the rules by the book type of guy. And, you know, I guess at that time had a problem with authority slightly, like people who just like impose their authority on you, like I just didn't agree with, or, you know, and then it would just cause this dynamic, this bad workplace environment dynamic. And so there was many times where like he would have to take me and write me up or whatever for mouthing off or something. And I remember one time, for some reason, him and I were just talking mutually, like it was fine. And he was like asking me about myself, and I told him I was adopted. And he goes, "Wow, that explains everything."
Ooh.
And I was like, "You, sir, are an asshole."
Yeah. I had an old boss tell me about, say that to me about an old coworker of mine. She was also adopted, was in the foster care system, and she was like, "Well, you know, some people like just can't move on from those things." And I'm like, you lady, no, no.
It's so easy to just label somebody because of the things that they had gone through. You know, it's a simplistic way of looking at things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I could guarantee the majority of my teachers, like in grade school and stuff, would never think that I would be where I am right now. Not that I was a bad kid, but like I did not care about school. I think I remotely maybe started caring about school like junior year of high school, and then that's when I kind of like was able to get partly of my shit together and like figure out what I wanted to do, and like actually started caring. And I mean, college was so much better because like yes, you had to do all like the general education stuff, but like it was so much more, like I had more control over like the things that I wanted to do, and like also like not living in my parents' house was much better.
It always is, when you become an adult, you just have to get out, because it just, that whole dynamic of being your own adult, and like you just got to figure out who you are as a person.
Yeah, I had a very rough time coming home after my freshman year of college. That was not good, because I got used to all of that freedom, and like I could do things on my own, and like I'd like to think I was relatively responsible as a as a human outside for the first time. And like having to come back, and like they need to know where I was all the time, and like couldn't stay out this place, or had to tell them wherever I was going. I was like, no, absolutely not.
Oh, that's so funny. So let's kind of backtrack a little bit. What got you interested in the social work field, and what made you become a trauma therapist? Made you want to become a trauma therapist?
Yeah. And so I actually went to undergrad for something completely different. And so it was called Child Life Specialty. And so I don't know if you're familiar with that at all.
No.
Okay, so child life specialists are often found in hospitals. Their primary role is to educate the family and the kids on medical procedures, hospital visits, and making sure that like everybody knows what's going on. They do a lot of medical play and medical preparation in terms of surgeries or other medical procedures like cancer treatment, stuff like that. Partly some of their job is like doing distractions. So like when kids need to get blood draws and things or other things that like require them to be awake during, which are not fun. They distract the kid and make sure that they're calm and have more of a pleasant experience, rather than like in the old days where they just strap you down, you're screaming, and like not fun, and it's traumatizing for everyone involved. So that's it. That's what I wanted to go into originally because of my experience being sick. And so that did not work out.
Did you have a bad experience with that? Is that what made you want to go into it?
With child life
with being sick, because you said that being sick kind of made you want to go into that field.
Oh no, I loved all the child life specialists that I had. They did a wonderful job taking care of me and taking care of my family. I wanted to do what they did as a job because it's fun.
Right.
But the profession itself, because I was an undergrad student competing with master's students for the internships for social workers, we have like the National Association of Social Workers or whatever. They also have like a council or whatever, and like they weren't really doing too much in terms of like the competitiveness of the field because there weren't enough jobs. Because I mean, there's maybe only 1-2 child life specialists per unit at most.
That's crazy.
Or even in a hospital. And so that was a way of like keep making sure that like there were going to be jobs available for the people who were like training to be this,
Is that because of funding? What is the purpose of only having 1 or 2 or none?
Probably that. And then also I think it's been a really big fight of like knowing that child life specialists are actually important and like they have a role in in healthcare. I think it's more of like a priority thing.
Okay.
Unfortunately. But so if you don't get an internship, you can't you can't move forward essentially. And so unfortunately I did not get an internship, but I was going to get my master's in social work anyway. And so my last semester of undergrad was just doing an internship. I didn't have any classes. I had to do some things like just like weekly, like write up things to talk about what I was doing, or I guess journal entries, whatever. And so I did a school social work internship, which I had never like seen myself in schools ever before. I had always wanted to be in hospitals before that. And so I loved it. It was really great. I mean, I had, it was a really nice change because I didn't have to worry about like people dying on me and stuff. Because I mean, like when you're in the pediatric oncology world, like that's something that's kind of like an inevitable. I'm also part of a camp for kids with cancer called Camp Sunrise. And so I do that, and then the siblings camp for that too. And so like I've been a part of that since I was 8.
Wow.
And so
what is that? What is that camp? You said you've been part of it since you were 8.
Yeah, so it's called Camp Sunrise, which is the main camp for the kids with cancer. And then you have the siblings camp, Camp Sunsibs, which is for the siblings of the kids with cancer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I started doing SIBS when I was, I guess this will be like my 6th year or so. And so I became a counselor there 6 years ago, I guess. But I've been involved in Sunrise for, I guess this will be my 20th year.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
That is crazy because you're not old at all.
Yeah. Makes me feel old when I think about how long I've actually been there. And then like having kids who are my campers and like now are counselors, I'm like, this is not okay.
That's cool. That's got to be a great experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up there. It's kind of like another realm where like these people get it. You don't have to explain things, but however, it's also another place where I'm kind of othered because I didn't have cancer. I'm like, I think there are maybe 5 or 6 other people that had what I had. And so we kind of have like a running joke of like, it's not cancer camp, it's chemo camp because everybody's had chemo there.
Oh, that's funny. So at that point, what did you go do after that?
So I went for my master's in social work. And so I have my MSW and then I got licensed. So like you have to, licensing kind of depends on where you live. So like I know in New York, like they have stricter licensing requirements than Maryland. So you have to have your LMSW. So like you sit for an exam and then get your like general practicing license, and then you can like be a therapist. And then 2 years, roughly 2 years after that, you have to have like a certain amount of hours and supervision and things. And you can sit for your second licensing exam. So your LCSWC, which is what I have. I was able to get that last year. And then, so I'm a fully licensed social worker, clinical social worker.
That's awesome. And you've done that for 2 years now?
So I've been, I guess this will be my third going on fourth. Yeah.
Okay. And how do you like that?
I love it. I mean, every job has their moments. I mean, the burnout is very real.
Yeah.
But I love what I do, and I'm not always the best with my work boundaries because I love what I do.
What do you mean by that?
Like I always tell my clients that I'm like as flexible as you are. So like if I can find time and I can squeeze you in somewhere, I will. That doesn't always benefit me later after when I've seen like 8 or 9 people in a day. But I'm getting better with work boundaries.
How do you manage that? Do you like, I mean, because being a trauma therapist, it's got to be pretty emotionally and mentally like tiring. How do you manage that?
I mean, over time, you develop a very dark sense of humor.
I love it. I love that.
And I mean, we all have our days where some things they just get to you, and you some days you can't just leave your work at work, especially when it was basically all telehealth through the pandemic and you were literally working in your house and had no separation there. But I mean, a lot of other days I can listen and share things that may or may not be super helpful depending on the person. I mean,
now being a trauma therapist, could you give me like I know you can't talk about any specifics of like people or anything, but like what kind of things do people typically come to you to talk about?
So in terms of trauma, so like a lot of people have like some kind of abuse history. They may have been in toxic, unhealthy relationships. They may have been partners or children of people who struggled with substance use, people who have struggled with death or had to be caretakers for other people who had illnesses. I have a couple people who have chronic illnesses. A lot of my people had PTSD or CPTSD. Unfortunately, CPTSD, which stands for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, that's not recognized in the big book of disorders, the DSM-5.
What would be labeled as CPTSD?
So basically what CPTSD is when you have more than one trauma that happens in your life and it's kind of repeated, whereas like there's also like a form of PTSD that's like chronic PTSD, which is kind of like a death by 1,000 paper cuts, but like complex trauma is when it's like multiple different traumas that kind of happen over time. And so like when you work in the inner city, like a lot of that runs through, because the people just don't have the support, the resources, the means to kind of live.
Right.
And so I kind of like fell into the trauma world, and I like didn't think I was gonna like specialize in trauma, but like I think it's been a very rare experience of mine where I've met people who haven't experienced any kind of trauma, and I typically don't understand those people. I'm like, what do you mean you've lived your entire life and never been traumatized? Like, what's that like? I can't even imagine.
One thing I found really interesting, I've kind of been thinking about it a lot lately because like for me, I've gone through some really traumatic things. And like for me to like have something affect me, like emotionally, it has to be pretty traumatic.
Mhm.
Like the bar for like traumatic events has to be like extreme
Yeah.
now. But it's real interesting to me because like one thing that I would think that might not be traumatic for me could be
Mhm.
extremely traumatic for somebody else, and it might not even be,
Mhm.
like that big of a deal. And
Mhm.
I've personally seen it with somebody that, they went through this event and it like traumatized them to the point where they still talk about it to this day. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's like nothing. And
Yeah.
it's kind of bizarre how humans are so different in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of speaks to like when I talk to my clients about stress, like or their feelings. Like nobody can tell you how to feel. Nobody can tell you what stresses you out because that's all very subjective.
Mm,
But yes, I totally, I totally agree with that. I mean, some people's like tolerance is just not to where other people's capacities are. Like some things that like, and some things that stress them out are like very, very intense. Whereas like some, maybe for you or I, like it's like, oh, that thing happened. Okay, I'm gonna go eat some ice cream now. And it kind of has to do with like resilience, also like your ability to kind of bounce back from really hard things, and like people's windows of tolerance, your ability to kind of regulate and bounce back, and your resilience, it varies from person to person. Um, but I mean, that's when you were saying that, I was just kind of thinking about how like I'm really bad at babysitting quote unquote normal children, because like my threshold for like freakouts is like very high, especially after working in a residential treatment center. I mean, I would walk in there, that was an internship in grad school. I mean, I would walk in and it was like not even 8:45, 9 o'clock in the morning, and people would be screaming, or like staff behind me would be carrying kids because they have to go into the quiet room and like have to regulate themselves, and they're being put in holds, and like, oh my gosh, I'm like, I just got here. I'm like, oh no, it's one of mine. What happened?
Oh, that's hilarious. That's so funny. Yeah, kids definitely vary drastically too. Like I have two kids,
Mhm.
and actually technically I have three, but I have two.
Mhm.
My son and my daughter. My daughter's like pretty chill. Like, she's not like extremely hyper unless like my son gets her
Mhm.
riled up or something. And my son, on the other hand, is like, what happened? Because this child is wild, like wild, wild. I don't even know like how that happened, but yeah, kids vary so drastically.
Mhm.
Um, I don't remember what we were talking about. Oh yeah, so my question is, how do you decompress at the end of a day? Because I remember when I went to therapy just
Mhm.
a few years ago, my therapist told me she had a therapist, and I'm
Oh,
like, I'm like,
oh
what?
yeah. Every good therapist has a therapist or has been in therapy themselves. I think it's very hard to be a good therapist when you don't have the experience of being on the other side of the screen, or being in the other side of the chair, or the other chair, you know?
Right.
um, but I mean, I recently started working with another adoptee who is also a therapist, and that's been really, really cool. Just being able to like learn different things, and learn again more of the language that I just don't have because you can't really Google it.
Right.
um, but I mean, some of the ways that I decompress, like I'm a power lifter, so I work out a lot. That's one of my hobbies.
Do you compete?
No, no.
No? Do you
I
ever?
compete against myself, but not other people. My coach would love me to try to compete, but no.
You should. You definitely should.
I I don't necessarily love being the center of attention like that. Like I often like don't like to work out with other people, because then I'm like, I kind of become like a backseat driver. I'm like, oh my god, you're gonna hurt yourself. Don't do that. But like I like competing against myself. Like I love like being able to like set goals for myself and like be able to reach those. But like if people are watching me, like I'm also like a very clumsy human. So like if people are watching me and I panic, like I'm gonna drop something on myself. That would not be good.
I went to a powerlifting meet last summer, and because I wanted to get
Mhm.
into powerlifting, I started powerlifting a little bit.
Mhm.
But one thing I realize is like, it's so funny because you're in this room with all these meatheads. Like everybody
Yeah.
up there is like, before they start, lifting, they're like pounding their chest
Yeah.
and like getting all worked up.
Yeah.
But everybody there is super supportive of
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
lifting. Even if you're competing against them, they're like, "Oh, come on, come on, come on."
Yeah. Yeah. I
It's
would
kind of
love to
cool.
go and see one, just not compete myself. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, my coach, I think she's 16 or 17, and she's like a certified like trainer and does and like she has her own business and like does all these things and she's really cool.
She's 16 or 17.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, and she competes, but I don't see that in my future.
That I hope you do someday. That'd be cool. What got you into powerlifting?
I don't really know actually. Like I was never like an athletic or like sports person ever. I know I like did gymnastics for a little while as a kid, and that was like cool. And then I got older, and I was like, I don't really want to like, because at some point you have to like compete and stuff, and I'm like, no, like because like I like doing things for me, and so
Mm,
like powerlifting is for me, and I know I like tried to like get into some kind of lifting like in college, and then once I was out of college, then I kind of started doing some more like group fitness related things that was like strength training with like weights and stuff, but like not like Zumba or stuff like that. I mean,
right.
I do that too, which is also fun. But uh that kind of started things with me like starting to lift, and then I found her through another group, my trainer, and then it's kind of I've been training with her for maybe like a year and some change now, and it's been awesome. Because I
It's
mean, she
just
writes all my things for me, and I don't have to think about it, and I just lift things and put them down, and then go about my day.
that is funny. I just powerlifting is like one of those like unique forms of working out that like
Hmm.
it's not like, I mean, because like generally like most females who just want to just work out, they just go, not just females but anybody really,
Hmm.
who just want to work out, just go to the gym and they'll just like maybe do some sort of like weightlifting program or something mixed with some cardio. But powerlifting is so specific.
Hmm.
It's such a specific thing. Like it's interesting that you pick that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also like I also have like a history of like eating disorders. So like I have binge
Mhm.
eating disorder, and so like finding powerlifting and being able to like switch my goals from like I need to change my body to like I want to lift 300 pounds off the ground because I'm 4'11", and like that'd be fucking badass. Like I never felt at like I will never feel as good about myself when like about like oh I can fit into a size 0, but like being able to like I think my one rep max now is like 245 or something. Like I've never felt more badass of being able to pick up 245 pounds off the ground.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. You should feel badass. um yeah, that's kind of crazy. That's so crazy to me. So you mentioned an eating disorder. What was the
Hmm.
eating disorder?
Binge eating disorder.
Binge eating. Okay. So you
Hmm.
just can't stop, like.
Yeah, so I mean with that it's like eating large quantities of food in a very short amount of time, or like being eating a lot of food to the point where you're like sick and like uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I mean that's something I didn't really even like realize I had, or like didn't really want to confront until the last few years either. And I'm in a much better place with that than I've ever been. But I think a lot of my issues still like kind of just stem from like body dysmorphia, which is like you when you look in the mirror you don't like what you see.
Yeah.
um and like that's still something that I battle on a day to day. But eating disorders definitely run in people who have or adopted people.
Mhm. And
um,
anybody who's experienced trauma, really, right?
Trauma, and then like and a lot of my friends from camp and stuff like and I've seen with other people like relationships with food after going through like cancer treatment like that changes, and your body changes a lot through that.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yeah, there's
Um,
lots of layers to that one.
what's that?
there's lots of layers to that one.
Yeah, there absolutely are. What kind of things would you find yourself eating? Like was there a certain type of food, like junk food, or was it what?
Pretty much anything. I mean, like, I know like one of my trigger foods was like ice cream. Now I couldn't have like pints of like Ben and Jerry's in my freezer because I would eat the entire thing in one go. Now I
Uh,
can. Or like before I wouldn't be able to have pints in the house, but I could eat like the small like bars or something like that. And now it's kind of like the opposite because I'm really lazy. I also have ADHD. So like the more things that I have to do to get one task done, the less I'm going to want to do that. So like
right, right.
when I have a pint of ice cream now, I'm like, oh, well, that means I have to go get a bowl and I have to go get a spoon and then I have to clean the bowl and the spoon after. And like, that's all. And I don't have a dishwasher or anything in my house. Like dishes are just never ending in my house. So like, no, I don't want to do that.
Not worth the ice cream, I guess.
Yep. No.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah, I
funny.
mean, it was more like junk food related things.
I think like for me, like I oftentimes wonder if I have a eating disorder because I eat a lot of food sometimes, but I also like a lot of times work out really hard too. So and I find myself doing these extreme type of diets, which I'm recently trying to get away from. I'm like I still do fast. I fast for like intermittent fast for like 16 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
But I would find myself like doing mainly like a meat diet or like a, with no greens or sugar,
Mm-hmm.
I'm finding now that like a balance, like having a good balance is healthy because, because like if I like, because I used to just eat just lunch.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm finding like if I eat like a little bit for breakfast and maybe I'll eat less at lunch and then I'll eat a snack in the afternoon and then dinner. It seems to be
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think one, you have to find what's right for you. So like I think intermittent fasting works pretty well for people who have like nurses who like work three days but 12-hour shifts and like they have to take care of people and don't have a lot of
Right.
time to like sit down and actually eat things. But like kind of like what you're talking about, like cutting foods out or cutting certain food groups out, and trying all these like fad diets like Whole30, keto, whatever, that's when it becomes a problem because like yes, short term you will lose weight, but once you start reintroducing all of those things back into your diet, like you're going to gain weight back. Maybe you won't gain all of it back, but you're going to gain those things back, gain weight back because you're reintroducing those things into your diet. And that's when like sustainability comes into play, which a lot of people have issues with because they're looking for the quick, fast thing that's going to get them the six pack
Yeah.
and like
Right.
all the things that society puts on us to that we need to look a certain way and feel a certain way and like bullshit beauty standards,
Right. Right.
that everybody's trying to achieve. But like you can't get there if it's not sustainable. Like if you can't do this 5 years from now, like then fuck it, what's the point? Because you're not going to be happy. Like I know at one point, like when I was tracking macros, like that triggered the shit out of my eating disorder. And I was actually kind of grateful for the pandemic because like that was really what opened my eyes to like, oh girl, you have an issue.
Right.
um and so like
What was
I,
the issue with the macros?
so you would have to like when you're tracking macronutrients, you are you familiar with that and stuff?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so
I was
when you're
just
tracking
curious.
that, like you have to be very specific. And so like I would I was doing it with a program within a gym that I used to go to, and like and again, what didn't work for me might work for somebody else, and like other people have no issues tracking macros. It had just comes when you have an eating disorder, all that gets a little bit harder because you're like setting yourself to these standards. You have to meet this number, this number, this number. And I also have like no concept of math. So like that was kind of hard too, to learn all of that. But like I would allow myself to have some kinds of things, but like I would still feel restricted. So I would just binge things later, or
Mm,
I would binge on the weekends. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm really good Monday through Friday. And then when it comes to weekends where I had like my free meals, which was a little bit better because instead of like a cheat meal, because like that has like a negative connotation. Like you would, if you were in a relationship, like you obviously wouldn't cheat in your relationship. Why cheat on your diet,
right. Right.
but like just couldn't, that was like unsustainable, because I was trying to be as good as possible and then just like feeling ravenous later when I wasn't eating enough, or I was just setting myself to these unrealistic standards that I just could not meet because my eating disorder wouldn't let me.
Right. I think,
And I did get down to like my leanest, and like even then, like I look back and I'm like, I was still not happy. I still wanted to change this. I still wanted to change that. And like I was like, I had the realization, like, no matter how much I changed, no matter how much I worked out, because at one point I was working out like 6-7 days a week, sometimes twice in a day. Like that was not good.
you don't think that's good to work out twice a day?
It kind of depends on what you're doing.
Were
Like
you
if you're doing
powerlifting
like,
twice a day?
yeah, like
Yeah,
you
that's
should
not
not
good.
that, no. I mean, I was at that point I was doing like metabolic conditioning, so it was like strength, it was like kind of like a mix between like HIIT workouts and strength training, so like it was very intense.
Yeah.
And it was like doing that twice a day sometimes, and like that's just
Oof.
not good. I mean, like your body needs rest, you need time to like recover, and that's like how you, if you want to make progress, you need that rest, and I was not doing that.
Yeah.
And then like I was also like working out so I could deserve to eat later, and like that's also not good, because every human deserves to eat.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can't starve yourself of I even think it's good to like give into cravings too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
within reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one thing that's kind of overlooked is eating disorders. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think your typical eating disorder, like in the media or in TV shows, all those things, is displayed not
Not you.
to the service where it should be. I mean, the majority of people with eating disorders just look like just you and I, people on the streets. You don't have to look like you're 1,000 pounds, or you don't have to look like you're emaciated.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of people with anorexia or bulimia don't look emaciated, but they have eating disorders.
Yeah.
It's something that's not very, I think it's getting better in terms of like being able to talk about it, because of like the health at every size, like fat positive, like body positivity, fat acceptance, like that whole movement. And I think that's getting a little bit better. Like I love seeing commercials where like people actually have roles, and like they're not like, oh cool, they have pimples and stuff. Like that's real life.
Right. Now have you is this something you've had to deal with, like talk about with other people's in your therapy sessions?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've learned a lot about myself through my clients. Like I never thought I had anxiety or depression before, because I do a lot of like assessment stuff for check-ins, like general like anxiety, depression stuff. And I I would look at him like, oh no, I would answer no to all of these things. But when I actually started going to therapy myself, my therapist is like, no, you're anxious. And I'm like, no, I'm not. But like, I mean, the first time I started working with somebody who had an eating disorder like that, I was like, oh, I do that. And I'm like,
Oh.
oh, this is fun. But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of clients who have been through similar situations that I have been in. And I think it's also, well, one, as a therapist, and when you've been through some of the things with your, like similar things that your clients have been through, you have to be very careful of like not putting your own shit onto other people, because like that's not what they're there for.
Right.
Also like extremely unethical.
Right.
So
Right.
if the therapist doing that to you, you need to leave. And so but I also think it's helpful when your therapist understands like what you've been through, at least can understand, or even understand that you don't understand. Like that has more power in it than being like, I totally know what you've been through. Like, here, let me help. And you're like, no, bitch, you don't.
Well, I think it's good to like, if you're a therapist and you don't understand what somebody's going through, just ask questions, because that's the only way you can understand. And by them like explaining what they're going through, I think will help them kind of put things into perspective as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times I just kind of sit there and reframe or like parrot back things or ask questions in like 80,000 different ways. And clients are like, oh, like something kind of like clicks for them. And I'm like, you had to come to that on your own. I could say as many things as I want, but like, if you don't come to those things, or if you don't want to change, or you don't want the help, like I can't do anything. I always tell my clients, like, I'm only as useful as the things that you tell me. And so like, if I don't know about anything, if you're hiding something or don't feel comfortable sharing something with me, like that's not going to change, you know?
Right, right. Now, being a therapist and having to deal with all the things you deal with and like talk about all the things you have to talk about, it's got to
Hmm.
be, like I said, kind of overwhelming. And one of the ways you decompress is by powerlifting. Is there anything else
Hmm.
you do that helps you not take it home?
I mean, I talk to my friends about some things, and like I I mean, I think the pandemic ruined a lot of the interests that people like to do because you had to be in your house.
Right.
So when people ask me some of the things that I like to do, I'm like, do I actually know what I like to do anymore? But I mean, I like to do I like to do art sometimes,
What
and
kind
to
of
hang
art?
out. I'm no way by any kind of means an artist, but I am pretty crafty. So like some like crafty things on Pinterest that you find, like I can like find like very simple painting things and like recreate those. Um, what else have I done? I've done like paintings on like glass frames. I like just picked that up and that was kind of cool. But typically when that happens, I'm like hyper focused on art and I do it for a few weeks and then I stop and then don't do it again for like months and then I'll pick it back up. I also I'm like covered in tattoos. You can obviously can't see them right now, but
I seen
that's
some of them
something.
on your arm.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one of my hobbies too, is collecting art
Cool.
on
That's
my
cool.
body.
That's cool. Is there anything else you want to talk or discuss before we wrap this up? I think we've been going for about an hour. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that was about it.
Okay. Um, Now you don't have any desire to try to find your biological family?
At this time, no. I mean, I I don't think I've ever really felt that inclination to do so, even just growing up. And like more now, as I'm more into the adoptee community, and like I read all of these things and hear all these horror stories, and like, or even, I mean, some of these, so a lot of, there's so much work that has to go into search and reunion, and there's so much risk to that. Like
What do you mean?
in terms of like opening yourself up to doing that, like
Mm, yeah.
doing all these things and maybe not even coming out with anything. Um, or even if you do find your biological family, like you don't, I don't speak Chinese.
Oh yeah.
I don't look anything near like a traditional Chinese person, whatever that is. Um, there's like risk of like them not wanting to know me, them like not liking me, like they're all like all of those things, you know.
Do you think that would affect you pretty traumatically if like you went and found them and they rejected you?
Um, Probably. I can't say no for certain or yes for certain, but I definitely don't think it would be pleasant.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess for anybody who's searching for their family and they are rejected, typically they want, if they're searching, they want a relationship. They want to know who they are, and if they're rejected, then I would assume that would affect anybody pretty
Yeah,
dramatically.
yeah.
That's one thing when I found my family, like I never really had a desire to find my dad until until I can't remember, it was like 3 years ago. But when
Hmm.
I turned 18, I had a huge desire to find my mom.
Hmm.
And I had, I guess, higher expectations for the way it was going to go.
Hmm.
And it didn't quite meet up to, like, I guess, what I had pictured in my mind.
Hmm.
Um, but so I can understand that. And the thing is, like, with finding my dad is like I just went into it with like low expectations because I'm like, I
Yeah.
haven't seen this guy since I was like 2 or 3. If it doesn't turn
Hmm.
out good, then I guess what is it to me if I don't have a relationship with him, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, I that that experience is so, again, so subjective. Like people's capacity for that is so different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, Before we wrap this up, is there any like words of inspiration you want to throw out there? Or I know I'm
I
putting you on
think
the spot.
everybody should go to therapy at least once in their life. I know therapy can be hard. And like finding the right fit and finding like the like financial limitations and insurance. Insurance is a whole fucking thing too. It can be challenging to find a good therapist and somebody who like specializes in what you need. But when you find the right fit, like it can do wonders for you.
Now, is there, this is another question, but is there like a good way to find a therapist that might fit other than like having to go to several different therapists?
So there are like therapist search engines like Psychology Today, Therapy Den, OpenPath, that will help you narrow down your search, but you really have to kind of meet with somebody first and then figure out whether or not you're a good fit, because like you can, obviously you're not gonna, as a professional, you're not gonna like air out all your business and like
Right.
you want people to like click on you and like come in. So like you kind of just gotta meet the person
Yeah.
first.
Are
But
there, I'm sorry, are
no,
there, are there, are there ways for people who don't have like resources to get therapy?
yes, but it's gonna be much more challenging, unfortunately, because capitalism rules our world. Um, but I mean, there are some places like I know Maryland has like the pro bono counseling project, and they offer free therapy services. Also, in the places that offer those kinds of services, the burnout for therapists tends to be very high. So like a lot of times the good therapists that you do find are either out of network because they don't want to deal with insurance companies entirely, or they are through insurance. And so it can be kind of hard.
Okay. Okay. I just had a question. I had to ask that because I know somebody who needs therapy and they don't really have resources. So
Gotcha. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at Psychology Today, you can look at Therapy Den. Those are pretty popular therapist directory search engine things, and you can kind of tailor it to like what you're looking for, insurance, location, specialties, and all of those things.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing this. It was a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to finally do this.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can do it again. Would you be interested in doing it again?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for doing this. It was an honor.
Thank you for having me.
Yep, absolutely. Have a good day.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.